well, we are here with Neil Gourley today. Welcome, Neil.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Neil is one of the current generation of world-class Scottish 1500 metre runners. We're lucky to have several of them at the moment. Neil started out with Gifford North, moved from there to Virginia Tech in the US, where he saw success in the NCAA and also earned an under-23 European bronze in Tallinn in 2015. He's now with Oregon Track Club, and in recent years he has seen everything from astounding achievements to terrible disappointments, and I think we're probably going to talk a little bit about both. So welcome, Neil. It's good to have the chance to sit and talk, and particularly I think to talk about the relationship that you've had with coaches over the years.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, thanks for having me.
I guess going back to the beginning then, you've mentioned Gifford North, but I believe we have Mrs. Thompson from Merrily Primary to thank for scouting your talent and sending you along to the club. So what are your very earliest memories of running and athletics in general?
Yeah, Mrs. Thompson I owe a lot to, because she was the one that suggested I should go along to Gifford North. Her husband, Croy Thompson, still helps out a lot at Gifford North with the younger group. So yeah, she suggested I go along. I was quite excited about that fact. It was kind of like I was being scouted for a team. So I'd been playing football so much that being scouted for a team was kind of everything I wanted to happen. So I went along to Gifford North and really enjoyed it under the tutelage of Claire Stevenson at first. I've been really lucky to have had sort of three main coaches in my career, all the sort of perfect coaches for the time that I've been with them. It started off with Claire, and she's so great with the younger athletes and still helps out, Claire Stevenson. And she does such a fantastic job with her youngsters and keeping them motivated and interested in it. And she just kind of, nourished my kind of passion for the sport a little bit. It didn't take me long for me to really enjoy the process of training, coming back the next week, finding out you've gotten a little better, coming back the next month, finding out you've got even better than that.
And what kind of sessions were you doing at that age? I assume a lot of it was just about having fun and keeping you moving rather than serious training.
Very much so. I mean, I remember the very first session Claire did with us. The object was to run as like a series of sprints or strides or whatever it was, and you weren't to use your arms, and that taught you the importance of having good arm action, and that lesson actually still sticks with me today. As soon as you run with no arms, you realise how much they matter. And so she taught me something day one that I still go back to.
Brilliant. And you mentioned football, and I know also your dad was very involved in rugby. Was there any kind of family pressure to follow in those footsteps, or?
I'm sure my dad would have been proud to see me in a Scotland rugby jersey as much as an athletics one. But he's very much in the rugby side of things. I played for a good 7 years or so, from about primary 4 onwards, something like that. Played from a young age, sort of mini rugby at GHK, which is where he's still actively involved with the rugby team. So yeah, I was playing for a long time. I was kind of doing a bit of everything. Just one of the youngsters that like to do a lot of sport, but eventually had to sort of give up the rugby and the golf and the football to focus on athletics. That was probably around 14 or 15 that sort of decided that I was going to try and focus on one and be good at one.
Was there a point where you kind of thought, what was it that made you choose athletics? Was there a point where you thought, I could be quite good at this? Or was it just that you enjoyed it a little bit more, or just that the group was a group of pals? Or
I think it was a mix of factors. Yeah, we had a really good group at the time at Gifford North, but by the time I decided to focus on athletics, I was with Gordon Lockie, who was my next coach, who was fantastic. He had a real good group of us, and we were all quite performance oriented. We really wanted to win and get better, and he was quite serious about doing so. He'd take a lot of time to do his research, and he managed to develop a group that was functioning really well, the sort of junior age groups, and we were winning lots of medals at the age group championships. The likes of Grant Muir and Max Law and Jack Walker, names sort of from the past a little bit. Grant's still going strong. But yeah, so a real good, strong group of us. I was never really the best in my training group by any means. I was a good ways behind people, but I sort of enjoyed that. It made, I don't know, it made sense for me to never be the best person in the group. It's always quite nice having people to aim for. So I had these guys who were a lot better than me to aim for, but you know, year on year I was making progress, and I really enjoyed the fact that I started getting out of the sport what I put in. By the time I was, 16, 17, I was really starting to realize that. And that combined with, just a bit of natural development, I was starting to run well after a couple of years where I perhaps wasn't. Because there were times when I was maybe 14 or 15, I just hadn't quite grown as much as some of my peers perhaps.
I was going to ask about that stage, because I think you've said that there was a period you went through as a kind of under 15 when actually you weren't enjoying things as much, you weren't getting the results you were hoping for. What was it that kept you going through that until you hit that age, maybe at 16, when you got a bit more of a growth spurt and just a bit more development and sporting development?
Yeah, it certainly happened. When I was about under 15, I don't know, I wasn't enjoying it because I didn't feel like I was maybe improving as much as I thought I would when I was just starting the sport. I think, you improve so much every year. And I was just starting to hit a bit of a rough patch where I had iron deficiency issues. That was part of it. I think maybe part of the reason keeping me in was, well, if I get this sorted out, I'm going to do well again. The other reason was that I'd already, looking back, it really wasn't a lot of time. But back then I thought, well, I've invested a lot into this sport. I'm starting to give up other sports to do this. I really should follow through. And my ultimate goal at that point was for someday to put on a Scotland vest. I thought maybe if I really play my cards right and I work for years and years and years, I might be able to do that. So I was, at that point in time, that was my motivation. I didn't have time goals in mind or anything like that. I just one day wanted to represent my country, and that would have been enough for me at that age.
If only you could rewind now and show 13, 14-year-old Neil where you're at the moment.
Certainly wouldn't have believed it. I mean, I know a lot of people say that, but I just wasn't even in the ballpark of where I thought I could get to in this sport at that age. It was just about maybe, one day sneaking into a Scotland vest one day.
And tell us about the first time that did happen, when you got your first Scotland vest.
It was a Celtic Nations cross country, and I remember just being one of the ones that I was hoping was selected. This was by the time I was kind of under 17. Being one of the ones that I was hoping was going to get selected, but just not quite sure. I was a wee bit on the bubble, so we were just waiting by the phone. And, for me and my dad at this point in time, I think he had as much joy as me getting my first Scotland vest. So he was, nervously waiting for the phone call as well. And when that finally came in, it was just, well, one, a relief because I was kind of hoping for it. I think I was in the running, but just this sense of, wow, I've made it. I've made it in the sport. I've accomplished what I wanted to accomplish. And the first experience was traveling to Celtic Nations cross country. It was in Ireland, and it was about 3 feet deep in mud the whole way around. But I just, I enjoyed the fact that I was representing my country for the first time. It was just the first time that I'd really thought, this isn't about me anymore. Which I really enjoy when it's not about me, to be honest.
And I know one of the other big events of your teams, you twice, I think, went to the mini marathon team down in London, including 2012, which was Olympic year. Did that make a big impression on you? Were you kind of aware of that, the Olympics and the wider world of athletics?
Yeah, I mean, 2012 absolutely was an inspirational year for most of us. It just happened to be the year where I kind of started to make breakthroughs as well. That was the year I think I won my first Scottish cross-country championship, and right after that was the mini marathon. And yeah, absolutely, that was making breakthroughs, and it was, to some extent, like looking at what was coming up in the future and thinking, wow, I'd love to be a part of that. I didn't think I was good enough by any means, but it was you start to get this buzz about sport in the country. And in March of 2012, that was kind of when things did start to happen. I think I was third at that mini marathon, something like that, which was a result I wasn't expecting at all. It was just a bonus for me. But yeah, looking back, that was the year I'd say I fell in love with the sport because of how hard we'd worked that winter. And how
the cross country there, I was going to ask you about that, because I think you said that was one of the things that really kind of shifted your outlook. So you won the under 17 Lindsay's national cross country, but you pretty much worked for that for a whole year. You decided early on with a coach. So was that pivotal in kind of not just how you felt about the sport, but teaching you lessons about goal setting and what you wanted from a coach who had that same kind of approach of setting a goal and really working towards something that might be ambitious?
Absolutely, yeah. No, that we had sat down in September or October, and this has been something of, the coaches I've had the pleasure of working with. We sat down and we decided, right, we're going to try and win the Scottish Cross Country Championships. And this was a good 5-6 months out. And at that point, I don't think many people would have given me a hope of doing so. There were a lot of talented guys at that age group, guys that you might remember, like Max Aitchison and Finlay Ray back in the day, and they were really strong and far and away better than me at that point. But we sat down and we decided how we were going to progress our training, what elements we were going to add in, and how we were going to get from this point to that point. And it worked. We added in lots of things. We worked harder. We pushed things that we hadn't before. And yeah, because of that, getting out what you put in, which is so true of this sport. I just kind of fell in love with that aspect of it, to an extent that some other sports don't quite get. You will get what you deserve if you really do things right. And it was just such a satisfying moment for the plan to pay off. When 6 months ago, I wouldn't have thought that would really be possible. But we believed the whole time that that's what we would do, and it ended up that way.
And a good lesson in long-term planning as well, the fact that these things don't happen overnight.
Yeah And sitting down with someone and deciding that that's what you're going to do, I feel is so important as well, because as much as you can set goals in your head, I think it's much stronger to at least write it down or make it clear to your coach or the people around you that that's what you're going to do. Because as much as you can try and keep yourself accountable in your own head, when you've got something, if you've committed something to someone, there's a sense of responsibility almost to not let them down, or even though if they wouldn't see it like that. Having that in your head is a strong motivator. You've told the people that support you, this is what I'm going to do, and this is how I'm going to do it.
And it was not long after that, I think 2013, that you then had to decide what you were going to do next, both in terms of athletics and life in general, and you went to Virginia Tech. That's a bit of a change of scene. How did that come about, and what made you go there, and what was Gordon saying to you at the time about the coaching and the club scene where you were and where you wanted to be?
Yeah, like I said, I was really lucky to have Gordon, and he pushed me on in my sport a great deal. And I would have been completely happy at that point to stick with him and stay around the country. I was looking at going to Strathclyde to study mechanical engineering, but I'd seen performances in the NCAA. The likes of Chris O'Hare was a big factor in my decision to go out to the US. So I started doing my research on NCAA schools and just basically compiled a huge long list and narrowed it down to schools that would suit both athletically, schools that I felt like unis that were performing well over distance running, and also had the sort of engineering side of things covered, because I was still quite serious about going down the mechanical engineering side of things. And yeah, just narrowed it down. Basically, some coaches get back to me, some wouldn't, but I'd done my research and we were able to narrow it down to a few places. But funnily enough, Virginia Tech wasn't on my radar. It was actually, I was doing an internship at that point with Scottish Power, which is a kind of gap year, because I wanted to figure out where I wanted to be in in the next few years. And the NCAA had at that point been kind of where I wanted to be, so I took my year out and pursued all of that. And a co-worker mentioned to me about Virginia Tech, and I kind of brushed it off like, oh, it sounds kind of like a boring engineering school. I don't think they'll be any good with their track and field team. But got in touch with the coach, Ben Thomas, there, and we kind of hit it off quite quickly. And I noticed, they had actually had some really good athletes just recently. And not only that, their athletes had improved by so much since they came in their sort of 4 or 5 years there. So that attracted me greatly. Took a visit and really, really liked the place. In fact, I'm here at the moment because my girlfriend works for the track and field team now. She's the director of operations. So funnily enough, I'm sort of back where it started in terms of my journey into the American side of things right now, training. So I'm with her at the moment. So that's been good. But I love Blacksburg, Virginia, and that's where I based myself through my years at Virginia Tech, and with my coach Ben Thomas. He is still my coach. He got the job at the University of Oregon just in the last couple of years, so I followed him out there. So when I'm based in Eugene, he's still overseeing the running side of the training.
And just in terms of sort of when you first went to Virginia, it must have been, or was it a big change in kind of in culture and in the kind of coaching setup between what you've been used to up to that point, and you running with, say, American students? Did you feel like they'd come out of quite a different background, or was there a lot of similarities?
There were real differences. I mean, all of them had all pursued their athletics through their school. So it was kind of a case where a lot of them, they were quite passionate about it, but some of them were just kind of doing it because they were good at it and it was what they did in high school, or maybe their parents had wanted them to do it, or maybe they were just trying to get a scholarship. But that's in the general sense in the US. But I was with a group of 4 or 5 of us that were really quite serious about the sport, and with our freshman class, I was quite lucky to be surrounded by people that were actually really motivated to improve. The culture is a bit different in that obviously there was no club system, so they were all, they were coming from their high schools where they were already on a big team, if you want to call it that, where they had practices after school every day, that kind of thing. So they were kind of used to that, whereas I wasn't, I don't suppose, used to this big team dynamic. But I loved it. I mean, I love, being able to train with people in particular that are better than me, that are stronger than me, that could push me to sort of new levels. So I enjoyed the aspect of just, being thrown into this team of people that were all just, trying to achieve the same goals.
And was there a big change in the kind of sessions that you were doing, or the number of sessions, or was that quite a sudden step up in terms of the approach that you were getting there?
Yeah, I mean, I had to certainly run more, but my coach was quite careful about doing that. I mean, he's taken on plenty of people that have been running less. I mean, maybe in terms of mileage, I was only doing 30 miles a week, but by the end of my first year there, I was maybe doing 60 or 70. But he was quite careful about building that up, as he usually is. And I was lucky to have people around me that were going through the sort of same things, coming from less, less training in terms of volume and less, intense sessions. Not that we weren't training intensely before. It's just a kind of different kind of setup, I suppose, where we'd have to be trying to do 8K cross country races in the winter time, and this was just something that was a little bit alien to me, but it made me a lot stronger in the long run. We'd have 13-mile long runs on the weekends eventually once I built up to that, and that was something that was kind of alien to me as well, but it's something that I'm very glad that we started doing, because it certainly paid off over the long run. It doesn't come quickly, that sort of strength side of things, but over the course of years, it was certainly what I needed in order to get stronger and improve over the side of things that was always kind of my weaker side. Anything longer than the 1500 in that sense.
You mentioned earlier the NCAA being a big factor in you wanting to move to the States, and I know you won a team title in the distance medal relays, which would have been a bit of a highlight for you. As a whole, what kind of influence do you think the NCAA had on your sort of athletic development at that point and getting used to competition and that kind of having that structure around you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the team aspect of it was absolutely brilliant in terms of enjoying the sport. I think that cultivated my, passion for it through those years. But in terms of the things I learned, I mean, I don't think you can really compare the sort of British system to the NCAA in terms of the amount of straight up racing you get to do in the NCAA, which is, I think, I'm absolutely grateful for. I think the sort of tactical aspects of running the 1500 meters needs to be learned over a number of years of just racing, just seeing everything that there is to see in terms of races going all which ways, which happens in the NCAA, which is fantastic. So I think you see that in the likes of Chris O'Hare, who always puts himself in the right place. You kind of just purely by putting yourself in tactical races a lot, you get to know, how to negotiate them. And the NCAA is very good for that. Whereas I think sometimes in the UK, you get one or two every year when it comes to national championships, but a lot of it is maybe, BMC races, which are fantastic for, chasing times, getting PBs, but perhaps aren't the best school for learning how to race, tactically. And that, I think, was the biggest lesson I got out of the NCAA, because it certainly wasn't there when I arrived. I made plenty of mistakes in my first couple of years, but it's improved over time, where I'm more and more confident going into any kind of situation, because I've kind of seen it all before almost now.
And then while you were away, the Commonwealth Games came to Glasgow, and I think at that point you were not quite at a level that you were going to be selected for the team. But were you able to attend? Did you see some of it? Was it another motivator for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was really just a 10-minute walk from my house to get to Hampden. So yeah, we were able to get to a couple of sessions, and as you say, I wasn't quite at the level where I was going to make that team. I was just off of it, and it was going to be another few years before I was at that kind of level. But it was sort of tangible at that point, and I was starting to believe that I could get to that kind of level. And then seeing people that I knew well competing in that environment, it spurred me on that it just wasn't that far away as perhaps I thought it was at that time. I guess something about seeing it, a 10-minute walk away from your house can be nothing but inspiring. And a lot of these athletes that the Scottish athletics are sort of are blessed with at the moment, if you want to say, are doing well at the moment, are coming through that era where they all saw close to home what happened in Glasgow, and just the reception that they got. I think all of this current generation of Scottish athletes are all sort of affected by the Commonwealth Games in some way. I was definitely one of them. Just it happened to be a bit more local for me, but it certainly had a positive effect seeing some of those sessions.
Well, and it seems to have done in that. I think 2015 was one of the years where your performances really improved. Your times got quicker. You went to the European under-23s in Tallinn and got a bronze, I believe. Was that something that you knew was coming down the track? Did you really put in a lot of extra work? Was there something clear behind that sudden improvement, or do you think it was just a stage of development that you were due?
I think it was the combination of my second year at uni. The first year at Virginia Tech was a little rocky. I'd had a couple of injuries and a couple of illnesses that just held me back a little bit. But I felt the progress we were making, and if we just could get this to click and I could stay consistent in training, that it would work. And the second year there, it did. We just trained consistently. We didn't have any real time off or injuries or illness. We were on top of everything, and it was really just a case of having 12 months where I was absolutely clued into my sport and really clicking with the program. It just took a year to really click with the program that Ben Thomas was setting out for me.
And how do you balance between yourselves and Ben? You're obviously especially when you were running in the NCAA, you must have been wanting to come and compete in Europe a lot. And I know even more recently in your career, you were running at Grangemouth, you ran our national champs. How do you balance racing in Europe and training and running in the States? Do the pair of you sit down and you say, look, this is what I want to do, and try and work out a schedule that makes sense?
I've been lucky that that Ben's always been really supportive about that. I mean, it was one of the deciding factors when I was trying to look at universities back in the day was, are you going to be okay with me going back to the UK, back to, races in Europe in the summer and trying to make teams and do, succeed in domestic competitions and hopefully international competitions, because at the end of the day, that was the end goal. So he's always been very good about setting things up where I'm able to peak, later in the summer than perhaps a normal NCAA athlete would plan on doing. So yeah, I've been lucky enough that he's always, very supportive about that, and we're quite good at working remotely now. We've certainly done it enough where he can coach me from afar, no problem. I can be, at home based in Glasgow or, traveling to whatever race, and we're quite happy working from a distance where he's, I sort of know his program so well, and he has enough trust in me that we're able to do all the things we would elsewhere.
Just fast forwarding a little bit to 2018, which was a big year, but in all sorts of different ways. So you ran third in the British trials, but then for the European Championships in Berlin, missed out on selection, which I know must have been one of the big disappointments. What was Ben saying to you at that point, and how did you use that to fire you up for what was to come next, rather than feeling downcast, feeling disheartened when you'd run really well but then not made that ultimate goal?
Yeah, it was incredibly disappointing, and my coach, if anything, was stronger about it than me. He was very, angry about the situation as well. We felt a little bit cheated, but that sort of raw sort of emotion about being, overlooked, it faded faster than you might think. We just had to sit down and say, look, if this is what it's going to take, if we're probably not going to get particular, looked on favorably, then we're going to have to get better. We're going to just make it black and white. It's going to have to be, finishing that top two, or don't worry about it, because that's how the UK selection's always set up at the moment. And it hardened me a little in that I just wasn't going to let it happen again, is how I decided from that point. After, I'd taken maybe 48 hours to be upset and disappointed and all the rest of it. That's my sort of general rule, is that after a big disappointment, you allow yourself 48 hours to maybe be emotional about it, and then you have to put it in a box and move on, because there's just no point dwelling on it. And some people might and be bitter about it for months, and it would sort of distract from their training. But we just had to use it as motivation for bigger competitions in the future. I mean, it was a European Championship. It was a big deal, but there were 2 subsequent years where there were bigger championships coming up. There was a World Championship, followed by hopefully an Olympics, and at some stage then, that we were going to focus towards and try and make teams in. So we just had to use it as, look, I mean, if this is what it takes for me to really be ruthless when I'm racing in the future and really just leave no stone unturned in the future, then fine. That's what it will have to be. If it motivates me every day to find those little small 1%, so whatever it may be, then fine. And that's the way we used it.
In 2019, you, as I say, I think you said you followed Ben essentially to Oregon Track Club. Was that the case, that he went first and then you made that move? Was that, at that point, was that just an obvious move for you then? Things had been working with him and you thought you might as well shift across too?
Yeah, I mean, put simply, it was a case of, if it isn't broken, don't fix it. We felt like we were making such progress at that point that it would be silly for me to try and move on when there were such a couple of important years coming up. I mean, I think a lot of people, as they graduate from the NCAA, they often look to, another training group or whatever it may be to try and, further their career. And there've been plenty of examples of that working well, and plenty of examples of the opposite, where, you had something that was working and you changed it and perhaps didn't work. So I wanted to stick with what I thought had been working. With myself and Ben Thomas had such a good sort of relationship at that point, a good understanding of training and where I needed to improve. So yeah, it was a pretty much natural decision that I would follow him out to Oregon, and it's been lucky to have such a great setup there, and it just made this decision quite easy for me to be out there in Eugene, where I've got such good support, especially through the Oregon Track Club as well. It wasn't a difficult decision, and it's one that, yeah, you know, I think I'd make the same decision again, no matter the circumstances.
And then 2019 itself again was a year of highs and then lows, chasing pretty quickly afterwards. So you ran superbly in the first round at the Glasgow 2019 at the indoors, and then fell ill literally just in the hours before the final, I gather. I mean, I guess it's a similar question. How do you pick yourself up after that?
Yeah, this was a different one. This one was more raw because, as I say, it was in Glasgow. I think any other country in the world, you sort of dust yourself off like after a bad experience like that. I mean, you think, oh, it happens. I'll go back home. I'll be okay. But because it was in Glasgow, in my hometown, it really stung, because I don't know if I'll ever get the opportunity to do that again, to compete in front of my home crowd in Glasgow. So it really stung. It was quite hard for a couple of weeks, and I was sort of struggling with motivation almost after that for a couple of weeks, just because it was such a raw thing, and I'd been building up to that with such kind of just a lot riding on it, because, as I say, it was in front of my friends and family, and it couldn't have been more personal to me to do well in that championship. But and the positive, or the way that I was able to cope with it, I suppose, was thinking about future competitions, and that I guess I was in the mindset of, at that point, if I'm making these teams, if I'm doing as well as I am, if I'm performing well, then things are going to happen for me. It was a very different thing to 2018 in terms of disappointment. It was more just, I don't know, at first it was, of course, just feeling sorry for myself, but more than that, it was just, I didn't want to let the people that had been supporting me so well down, and to repay that a little bit later in the year, I think was important to me. The people that had been behind me.
Certainly what happened. So in the Come British Trials, you won 1500 metres, the qualifiers for Doha, and again in an absolutely stacked final. Was that something that you and Ben saw coming? Did you know you were on really good form, and you say you had decided to try and aim for first and second and leave no doubt in the selector's mind? Did you feel that was definitely a reality?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to, sitting down with Gordon Lockey, 5 or 6 months before the Scottish Championships. It was the same thing afterwards, after a month maybe to cool off, and we debrief about it and think, well, next year there's just going to be no doubt. We're going to sit down and we're going to plan, and how are we going to win this next year? And so, no, it wasn't a surprise in the sense that I didn't think I could achieve it. It was a surprise when I crossed the line. Don't get me wrong. I mean, as much as you plan for that, and psychologically you need to be kind of, I'm not going to accept any alternative, is how I approach a lot of races, is, not accepting the alternative, which would be to not be in that top 1 or 2, as much as you're, quite steely in your head about that. When I crossed the line, it was emotion that just of sheer surprise and joy. Just as much as you think you're going to do it, until you do it, it's not the same. So looking up and seeing my brother and my parents in the crowd afterwards, and they had been through the same sort of emotions as me in Glasgow in March when that hadn't gone so well, and just seeing them fist bumping in the ground, it was just, that was enough for me. That was brilliant. That really made up for it, I suppose, just the turning around of events in that year.
And the prize that earned you was that you then went on to Doha and made it through to the final, and you were part of a World Championship final where there were 3 Scots lining up. I think more Scots than Kenyans. Certainly a historic event in terms of Scottish Athletics. How did that feel? How does it feel to have been part of that and to have earned your place there, and to be lining up with Jake, who you'd raced against at Scottish schools, and Josh, who I think you'd competed against in the NCAA. That must have been something.
Yeah, it really was. I don't think I would have enjoyed it as much if it was just the kind of the individual aspirations that had come through. I mean, I was, over the moon once I got through the heat and the semi-final in particular. I'd raced well, and I'd come off of that beating people that, looking back, you never thought you would have beat a few years ago. Just some names that, I'm sitting wondering after the race, like, how the heck did I find myself here? But then that all quickly turned when I got into the media zone. It turned to, Jake and Josh's semi-final is up next, and I was kind of holding off on talking to people because I wanted to watch on the screen that was in the background. I couldn't talk to people yet because I was too busy sort of shouting for Josh and Jake at that point. And I think Josh coming down the home straight was pretty safe, but Jake just needed to squeeze through. So when he ended up making that final and just sneaking in the sort of fastest loser spots, I was fist bumping, and I think people were a bit confused as to why I was fist bumping at that point and not before. But it was special to have these boys with me in the final. It just made it a whole different experience. And cooling down afterwards, we all just had this moment of how have we ended up here? When you take a back step from it, as much as we all had our high expectations, as looking back, particularly with myself and Jake, when we were fighting it out as in Scottish schools races and cross country races in the past, where we weren't even the best in our age group. It's just, you think back and wow, how did we end up here from that point? And to have someone that's been with me from back then, it made it all the more surreal, I suppose.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's a nice point to leave it on. We look forward to seeing all of you sparring against each other again, hopefully sooner rather than later, but we shall see. Thank you very much for sparing the time. It's really good to talk to you.
Thanks very much for the interview, Sue. Appreciate it.